Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me in this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 90 of the podcast is Andy Weir. He's the New York Times best-selling author of The Martian, Artemis, Project Hail Mary, and Cheshire Crossing. Yeah, that Andy Weir. He also has a short story, Randomized, that can be found in the Ford collection on Amazon. He built a 2-decade career as a software engineer until the success of his first published novel, The Martian, allowed him to live out his dream of writing full-time. He is a lifelong space nerd and a devoted hobbyist of such subjects as relativistic physics, orbital mechanics, and the history of manned spaceflight. That's from his website. It's a pretty good bio. I wanted him to come on this podcast to talk about teaching. This podcast is about learning how to teach better. And I have used his books and his examples that he's put in his books to help me teach better. And so I wanted to talk to him about it. I wanted him to peel the onion back a little bit, see a little bit of his process about how he built the books, but then also to think about, well, what led to this guy who was a software engineer that explored these spaces, these technological and space science spaces, in order to create these stories that then so many people love. When I talked about it, and I was hesitant to talk about it because Andy Weir is a busy guy. He's got a lot of things going on. And I booked this and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking I might get Andy Weir on the podcast. People are so excited, right? So excited about his work, about his books, about the movies that are made off his books, and the future movie possibly from Project Hail Mary that's coming out with Ryan Gosling. Holy cow. Anyway, I wanted to talk teaching with him, and we do that, and we do about a number of different things, and I think that there's some lessons to be learned about learning how to teach better in here. I don't want to delay anymore because this was a great conversation. Just excited to have it, excited to share it, just like usual. So without any further delay, here is my conversation with New York Times bestselling author Andy Weir. Andy Weir.
Hi.
Welcome to Amidon Planet. How are you?
I'm doing great. Your listeners don't know this, but I'm like an hour late to our interview, and I feel bad about it.
That's okay. That's okay. We're willing to roll. We have a lot of teachers, so they know about how to roll with just whatever's happened during the day. Hey, you got to
send me to the principal's office because
exactly. And of all the planets that you wrote about, I don't know if you've ever dreamed about coming to Amidon Planet. I don't know.
No, you fantasize about it when you're a little kid, but.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, again, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. And, I've been excited about this and then sharing, and I didn't want to, because sometimes we've been working on this for a while. It would just I would say, I'm taking my shot. I put a little email out there and saying, would you be willing to come on? And we finally, I think it's been over a year, but just, back and forth.
Yeah, there's been that email thread that goes back and forth, but I've always been busy or whatever.
It's great.
Yeah, I've been, guilt was a big part of it. I've turned this guy down so many times. I got to do something because lately, right now, I'm not really doing much in the way of interviews or events or anything just because my wife and I have a baby and he's taken up all of our time. Babies are very selfish. They don't care about your schedule.
That's right.
And but I finally got your soft sell technique finally
or you don't. This is how I got married, Andy. That's.
Will you marry me? No, I'll check. I'll check in a week.
That's right. But I've been using some of the videos from The Martian as trying to get my students to understand what do I mean about what I call a messy task. And so thinking about and I teach elementary math methods, and so we talk about make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Which is one of the number one standard for mathematical practice. And I think that, The Martian over and over again, and both your books and all your books, there's some sort of task that there is to solve. And then there's all these other tasks. And it's you need to know things in order to do things in order to get that next task done, and then need to go on to the next thing. And so I just thought that I would, using yours examples as a way to get at that, thinking about what does it mean to put messy tasks in front of kids and get them to be intrigued about them was, I don't know. And then that led to wanting you to come on the podcast.
And here I am.
Yeah. So, so we already talked about the soft sell to get you to come on, and again, I appreciate your time. But
Sure.
I guess so thinking about this is like we talk about the books and how and you've said this, like they're fairly simple plots. Like, hey,
They really are. Yeah, they're not. I like to have like a simple premise that I just kind of like work outward from there. Right. That's what I like to write about. Or I'm a simple writer.
So, but how do you do it? How do you? I mean, like, so what was like the simple premise that started off with The Martian or Project Hail Mary, or even I love the new one, the randomized, the little, I guess, novellas, I guess too. Like,
yeah, that was part of the Blake Crouch and the Forward collection.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Forward collection.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the kernel, I guess, or whatever, of The Martian was, I'm a nerd, I'm a space dork, and I always have been. And so I was sitting around, not for the purposes of fiction or thinking of stories. I was just thinking about, like, how would we do a crewed mission to Mars? How do we put people on Mars? And I'm like, so I started putting together a mission plan. I'm just like, oh, whatever. And so, to be clear, like, once again, I wasn't doing this with the idea of a book. I was just doing this because that's the sort of thing I do. I just sit here and go, I'm going to design a Mars mission. Why not? I got nothing to do today. And so I started off with, like, okay, how do we get them there? What do they do while they're there? How do we get them back? How do we make sure that one failure doesn't kill them? Because Mars and Earth's orbits are not very cooperative for, aborts. It's not like a lunar mission. The moon is always in orbit around Earth. You go, you come back, whatever. But if you're going to go to Mars, it's moving around the sun at a different rate than Earth and so on. And I started expanding on existing technology. It's really fun. The research aspect of a project is always my favorite part. I got Excel spreadsheets on top of spreadsheets. I got everything going on. I got my math everywhere. I love that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I told you I'm a nerd. And anyway, so I started thinking about, like, okay, any mission plan needs to account for what do you do if something goes wrong. You can't just die if your life support system fails. There needs to be a backup, a secondary backup, a plan for if you have no backups, and so on. Mission plan needs to handle everything. And so I started thinking of more and more things that could go wrong. What if this and this go wrong at the same time? What if this and this and this go wrong? And then I realized that would put the crew in an increasingly desperate situation. I'd be like, well, maybe they could do this to stay alive long enough to go do that, to stuff like that. And I was like, this might make a good story, but I don't want to have a whole crew working together because I'm not a real writer. I just want one person there. I don't want interpersonal relationships. That's what real writers do. So I engineered a way to have one person stranded there and then subjected him to all of it. So, but the kernel, you asked, like, what was the core idea? And that was just, Apollo 13 on Mars, basically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Houston, we have a problem. Earth, we have a problem. Yeah. I mean, like, even to start, like, with the, just think about what Mark Watney and, like, on the ground with, something through his suit, and like the warning's like, all right, go.
Like, yeah. Well, I do like to start in media res, as they say. I like to start somewhere interesting and then move forward from there.
Yeah. Cause then like so we have an overarching problem, which I kind of in my classrooms like equate with, like, here's a goal, here's a standard that we're trying to shoot for by the end of this year. All right. So now what are the little jumps that you have in between, just immediately to, get inside, right? To developing a communication system.
To solve a big problem, you need to solve a bunch of little problems. Or another way to look at it is the best way to solve a big problem is to break it down into a bunch of little problems, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, how did you, I mean, when you're setting up your spreadsheets, so like, it's like, okay, to get from here to there, like, what are all the different problems or things that they'd have to solve? Like just even the communications system, it seems like that's a big thing to solve in the Martian.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, well, the results I came up with because you read the book. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, these were all, that was, I don't know. I love that part of, like, coming up with the problem, coming up with the solution. And then I just narrate the character doing that.
Yeah. And so like we dive into that. We like almost digest that as like a football play or something like that. Thinking about all the different levels of knowledge. So like the trivia sort of things that you need to know, like how to calculate the circumference of a circle, and like what are the degrees, and then like how many, then you have to know how many letters in the alphabet, and like all the just little trivia things that you need to know, and then the skills that need to execute in order to then to differentiate, like, all right, the alphabet's not going to work, so we need to use hexadecimal. That'll actually get me the communication that I mean, all those different things in order to solve just this one problem in the grand scheme of problems. It's just, I don't know, like it gets me excited as a teacher. Like these are the kinds of things, like when, like kids ask, well, why would I need to do this? Well, here's a rich problem to think like, well, here's why you need to know these things.
Well, you can never trust teachers because like when I was growing up, everyone said, oh, you're not just always going to have a calculator with you.
Mm.
But we do.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, exactly.
So they lied.
Right. They did. Well, and that's like, and how do you use your tools, right? And the tools strategically. And that's another one of our things is like, what tools do you have available? What are the things that you have with you in order to solve the problem?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about the kinds of, so like when you're thinking of the next text, like Project Hail Mary, like I'm guessing that was, well, I don't know. I'm not even going to guess. Like, just what was the kernel for that book? Well,
that the basic premise there was, I thought, like, wouldn't it be cool if we had a mass conversion fuel? Like that's what it started with. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we had the some sort of fuel that was able to turn just mass into light energy, and you could use that as a propulsion? And because then, if we had that and we could make it, then we could colonize the solar system easily. There's all sorts of cool stuff we could do. And then I started thinking about that. And I was like, okay, so I really want to write a story where humanity, modern day humanity, has that technology, but there's no way we could invent that. Like, we don't have anything close to that kind of technology right now. I'm like, okay, maybe they find it. It's some weird naturally occurring thing. Or originally I thought like maybe they find like an alien spaceship that crashed on Earth 500,000 years ago or something, and they find that fuel and then they reverse engineer it. I'm like, that still seems like a lot. Like, okay, you reverse engineered something that's like 7,000 years ahead of our time technologically. It's like, oh, a caveman found a nuclear reactor and now he knows how to make one.
That's right.
Like, and then so I thought like, well, maybe it's something that's naturally occurring. Because then I thought, like, how do they make more? Like, you get some of this fuel, but how do you make more? And I thought, like, well, maybe the fuel itself grows. Like, maybe you can make more fuel if you have some of the fuel. And I'm like, well, that sounds kind of like life, right? So what if this is a life form? Then I'm like, why would a life form need like that much energy? Why would it evolve that ability? And I'm like, oh, it's an interstellar life form, so it needs all that energy to travel from star to star. And like, where does it get all the energy? Well, from stars. I'm like, oh, okay. So now I've got a system where it reproduces, and I came up with this. Okay, it's a monocellular life form. It migrates from star to thing like that. But I still didn't put it together yet. And it was like, okay, so some of that ends up in our solar system, and we find it. Then we start making our, interplanetary society and stuff like that. I'm like, and in the back of my mind, I thought, man, they'd have to be really careful. It would suck if that got into our sun, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so they would have like all sorts of safety rules and stuff to make sure. Wait, no, back it up. That's the story. That's the story. Go back.
Was that it? I mean, was it like that? It like, hey, wait a second, boom, like lightning, like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, basically at that point I was like, oh, okay, I got it. This is it because I really like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, elegance in plots. And I love it when it's like, okay, in this case, we have a situation where the problem is also the solution to the problem.
Yeah. Are you talking to people when you're doing this, or is this all just internal?
It's internal. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to bore my friends with too much of it. And, but I have a good time with it. So.
But
like
I guess that's part. I mean, so internal, but then part of your story, and we're going to post a link to your TED Talk where you talk about how you, got into publishing and self-publishing, and then led to your books getting acquired. But like just putting your ideas out there, it's like, okay, well, somebody will like this. I might not want to bore my friends, like you said, with it, but
Right.
somebody will enjoy this thing. So how did that get going with?
Well, I mean, boring my friends. Like I was hoping my friends would also like the story that I wrote. What the boring part is developing a story. Like, that's when you're going back and forth on like, oh, the math of this, or how does that thing work? Presenting just the end result is hopefully entertaining, because that's what I'm doing for the readers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the like calculating like, how many calories are in a potato? Like,
Yeah. That's a thing. That's, sometimes you got to know how many calories are in a potato.
That's right. So when you, like a little bit into your writing process, so a lot of this internal stuff. So, I mean, when you're doing this research, like, I don't know, just thinking about coming up with this fuel source, like when you start with that idea, like, where are you going? I mean, is it just diving into the internet? Are you talking to experts?
Just diving into the internet. Yeah. I just, people think I have this like Rolodex full of, experts, and I kind of do, but Google answers faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And so when you were again, just asking a little bit about the process, because I'm dealing with a lot of like students that are, doc students, but they're also working teachers, and they're engaging in writing, different kind of writing from what you're talking about. But like, just when you were still working and you're engaging in this stuff almost as, on the side, like how were you doing it? Like, were you just getting up early? Was it just something that you thought about on walks, on break? I don't know.
Yeah, walks, pretty much. Long walks. I love. That was like one of my main creativity outlets, was taking long walks.
Nice. And just going through those questions, like, I can't do that. Can't do. That might be a good possibility. Like,
right.
Yeah, grabbing notebooks and stuff.
Yep.
Nice. So in a previous podcast, you mentioned a few teachers, because we talk about learning how to teach better. Mr. Fong, Mrs. Cox, and Mr. Nicola, three teachers that you recognized just as someone that's people that stood out in your life. What did they do to help you become who you are today?
I don't know. It's interesting. So like, Mr. Fong was just, I don't know how to put it. It's difficult to describe. He was just really good at being a teacher. All my other classes, the kids were always a little bit not paying attention or whatever. Mr. Fong was our math teacher, and he would just keep people focused. He had this frenetic energy about him. He was always like flying from one blackboard to another, and this is how this works. This is how this works, and I'm going to show you how this works. And now, and then he'd bring the students up in pairs to solve problems on the blackboard. So he'd write like, or he'd put like, Joey and Michelle go to that part of the blackboard and solve problem one. Then you two go there and solve problem two. And then you'd have all the students there. I guess he was just, I guess the best way to put it is he was just a very skilled teacher. Like he was just a very good teacher. He could keep the students engaged and interested, which is, not something everybody can do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like getting people to be engaged and doing things together and not just sitting and just regurgitating things from the textbook.
Right. Yeah. Well, for sure. Yeah. And then also he was just, I don't know, you had to get up there and solve the problems. I mean, you didn't have to do it right, and he'd tell you where you messed it up if you didn't, but it wouldn't be like, yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. It wasn't just regurgitating data from a textbook.
Yeah. I mean, even just think like, some of the things that he's talking about, and again, being a math teacher, thinking about like doing things together, like, hey, we're up there struggling together on this problem, or we can help each other out and whatever. And knowing that you didn't have to always get it right, and he probably sounded like created an atmosphere where there wouldn't be any shame if you didn't. And so it could be an option to learn from mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a great teacher.
Well, Mrs. Cox.
Yeah. Mrs. Cox was another math teacher. She was my geometry teacher. And, I don't know. She just had maybe I was just, it's really difficult for me to describe how, what makes any given teacher good. I think the one thing they all have in common is that they all really cared about it. Like they all wanted you to know it. They weren't just there like you said, regurgitating, notes from a book. They were, Mrs. Cox would show us how to do stuff. Hers were much more lecture oriented. She didn't bring kids up to solve problems or anything like that. She would be interactive with the class. She'd be like, okay, can anyone tell me this, that, or the other thing? But it was more the traditional, everybody's in their seats and answering questions. I don't know. Maybe it's more about I was just very receptive to, being taught geometry at the time. I'm not sure. I
wonder too, and I don't know if you've ever thought about it, geometry's got this, there's a set of rules, right? We start off with these, these little products of point, line, and plane, and then we come up with all the world based off of those three things and how they interact with each other and give, labels to things. And so it builds up this world and what can you do in this world? If you given this, what can you do that? It almost seems like if you're given a Martian, injured on a planet with these supplies, can they get home? It seems like that. I don't know. Have you ever made those connections?
Never did really, but yeah, good point.
Yeah, because when they talk about lawyers and things, they talk about what is their geometry scores? Because again, it's here's a set of principles, and so what can you do within this world? Or else too, even the really high level mathematics, when they when they're talking about field and ring theory and all that. I can't even remember. I got notebooks where I can't even read them anymore. But it's what are these worlds? What do these worlds mean? What can you do if you've set up with these basic principles? And it seems like that's sort of the same thing here. If hey, if we start with this, where does that go within these stories? Anything, and again, just to give a shout out, Mr. Nicola. Anything stand out from Mr. Nicola?
Yeah, Mr. Nicola. He's interesting. He's the only one on that list that is not a science or math teacher. He was my history teacher, and I guess I have to give one of the things that stood out for Mr. Nicola for me was I didn't like history normally. I never cared about it. It wasn't interesting to me. It wasn't I didn't care. I was a math and physics nerd. I didn't care about history, but he was. I know I keep giving you the same vague answer, but he was just really good at teaching it.
No.
He made us care about it. I remember one thing he did was he made his classroom into Ellis Island, and we were all immigrants, and so we all had to wait in line and go through. And some of us started off. Everyone got a card saying who you were and where you're from and what you got and stuff like that. And so I was this impoverished German immigrant or something like that.
Yeah.
But the kid in front of me was this rich Italian immigrant. And so he just bribed his way past everything because he could, because he, Mr. Nicola, brought in other teachers to play the role of the functionaries at Ellis Island. This is in the 1800s. And you could bribe them and stuff like that or whatever else. And so the kids that were randomly assigned to wealthy people just bribed their way through. Kids that were black, they were assigned they're black or they're Chinese or whatever like that, were oh, you have to go through this extra stuff. It's just interesting. It wasn't just he didn't just tell us it. He had us role play it.
Yeah. Well, I think how many years ago that was and how those moments still stick with you.
Yeah, I guess it was on the order of 35 years ago, and I still remember that. We also assassinated President McKinley.
Okay.
Yeah, because we did this whole thing that was we did a bunch of stuff where we kind of acted out stuff from the turn of the century, and this one kid was always William McKinley. And because whenever he said that guy, whatever we need, William McKinley, there's that guy. Yeah. And then at the end, we assassinated William McKinley. Oh. Well, he was shaking hands with everybody, and then one of the kids went up and shot him with a laser tag gun.
Again, powerful moment. Maybe not a moment we can do anymore, but a powerful moment.
Yeah, nowadays unless you said, well, just make your hand into
exactly. But yeah, thinking about.
No, but he did the thing that I know a lot about the assassination of William McKinley because of that, right? I know that Leon Solges had a small caliber weapon in his hand, and he draped his jacket over it, and he went up like he was going to shake McKinley's hand, and then shot him.
Yeah. Again, we did a book on this podcast, Chip and Dan Heath, and talking about the power of moments. And I mean, obviously, like you're saying, 35 years later, like that's a powerful moment. And right.
Well,
and,
I mean, when you're there at an assassination of a president, you remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for taking that time to share on this. I mean, like, and even just to say like the investment that each of them showed in different ways in showing that they cared and getting you all to care about
It also shows that I didn't, I'd never codified in my head before what it is that made them good. I knew they were good teachers, but it's difficult for me to put into words exactly why. I give it a shot here, but yeah. I think in all three cases, the common thread is they genuinely cared. Like they were really invested in us learning.
Well, and I think, and I'm going to keep drawing parallels back to your work and thinking about like you're doing like heavy math problems in some of this, and like, and you're leaning in like, is there enough calories to make it? And it's like it's. I think you said another part. Just it's a bunch of algebra story problems.
It's a bunch of it's a bunch. I don't understand why a book of algebra word problems became so popular.
Right, and then that's the thing. And why would like these the going through Ellis Island stick with you? But like he built up drawing. That could have just been, hey, here's what Ellis Island was like versus no, you're going to experience it. You're
going to be an impoverished German immigrant.
yeah, exactly. And so just to shift a little bit, I mean, so talking about some of the, going from algebra story problems to, I think I've had some struggles in, depression, anxiety a little bit.
Did you find that stuff about me when you were researching?
Oh yeah. But like one time I was just having a dark period and I read The Martian and it gave me hope. I mean, cause like some of the things about the world and you just like, but The Martian gave me hope. And in The Martian, one of the last lines is, and I'm just going to read it to you. Apologize in advance, but the cost of my survival must have been hundreds of millions of dollars, all to save one dorky botanist. Why bother? Well, okay, I know the answer to that. Part of it might be what I represent: progress, science, and interplanetary future we've dreamed of for centuries. But really, they did it because every human being has a basic instinct to help each other out. It might not seem that way sometimes, but it is true. So what do you say to those that enjoy your work like I do and that embrace it for the hope that it communicates around our abilities to overcome collectively?
Well, I guess I genuinely believe that humanity is good. Like it's easy to lose sight of that, but it's we are as a species pretty awesome. And I have a lot of faith in humanity. One thing I like to do when I'm at talks, in-person talks, is I ask the audience, hey, anybody here, can anybody tell me a technology that has done more harm than good for humanity? And people will start by saying, well, what about nuclear bombs? And I'll say, well, what about nuclear power, right? How many people have not died in coal mines because of nuclear power? How many people have not died from, the long-term lung effects of pollution because of nuclear power, how many wars haven't been fought over energy resources because of nuclear power, and so on. And so it is extraordinarily difficult to find any technology. I mean, if you get super duper specific, if you say like, okay, mustard gas, all right, well, that's bad. However, if you back it up a bit and say, organic chemistry, it's done a lot of good. And I say, well, that should be a clue to you about kind of the true core nature of humanity, is that if you give a planet full of humans a new technology, the vast majority of them will figure out ways to use it to help other humans. Nice. Like some of them will weaponize it. And they're like, all right, well, that's going to happen. Yep. But the vast majority of people are like, how can I use this to make life better for people? I mean, that's the first thing you think of. Like that, or that's the first thing most people think of. They're like, wow, I could really do something awesome with this, Yeah. Like, I wrote a story, I don't know, it was called Yuri Gagarin Saves the Galaxy. But basically these aliens offer. It's a short story I wrote, and Yuri Gagarin goes up. He's the first human ever to go into space, and these aliens are like, "Welcome, as the first of your species to leave your planet. You are officially the ambassador of Earth to the intergalactic, community or whatever." And they're like, "We'd like to offer you, basically everything. We want to offer your people all sorts of stuff to help you out." And he's like, "Wait, what? Like what?" And they're like, "Well, here's a device. We notice that you still do a lot of mining and a lot of your people get hurt. Here's a device that'll you just point it at a mountain and it'll just like evaporate except for the elements that you want." And he's like, "Well, what if you pointed it at like a city?" And they're like, "Well, I mean, that would be disastrous. So you wouldn't do that, right?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Okay, well, we're going to pass on that technology. No, we don't want that." And so he just bit by bit just keeps saying no because they keep offering this, like all this, they're like, all right. We notice that your species has cancer. Here's a technology where you can make a custom virus that'll attack just the cancer cells in a person's body. So you just do that for every person who has cancer, and then nobody will have cancer. And he's like, "Oh, that sounds good. Wait, can I make a custom virus to do other stuff?" And they're like, "Well, I guess theoretically." It's like, could I target people? Could I make a virus that's only deadly to people based on their skin color or something? And they're like, the aliens are like, "Well, I suppose you could, but why would you do such a thing?" And Yuri Gagarin's like, "No, we're going to pass on that technology too." And so he ends up just saying no to everything. And
yeah,
but yeah, so that was kind of the opposite of what my true beliefs are, which is that humanity tends to do good. I think if you gave us too much technology too quickly, it might be pretty bad.
Yeah. I think someone stole that last one from you. Wasn't that the plot of the last Bond movie?
Was it? I don't know. The what? That was a custom virus?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a new. I mean, that goes back.
No,
100 years worth of fiction.
No, I'm going to give it to you. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yep. Stamp it. There we go.
I'm the first person ever to think of a weaponized virus. All right.
That's right. But it was custom. It was custom. Like, it was very customizable to one person. Anyway.
Oh, wow. Now that's customizable.
Yeah. No, it was really good. All right. So, in given your just kind of transitioning to that way too, you have been very open in talking about mental health, and we talk a lot about that, especially after the pandemic, and thinking about how to teachers stay fit, not just physically fit, but mentally fit. And sometimes that means more than just taking a walk or engaging in some breathing exercises. So, what do you do to stay mentally fit, or what do you suggest that teachers do? Because I think sometimes it's teachers think they can do everything, and like they avoid doing things that they need to stay mentally fit.
That's I wish I had answers for you on that. I could tell you about my own experiences with depression and anxiety, but I mean, things that I would do to stay mentally fit. Well, I enjoyed taking long walks. And I don't know if these are things that actually helped, but they're things that I don't know, maybe even just coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Long walks help me kind of recenter. I've mentioned before, I love doing the research and the math, but that for me is an escape.
Yeah.
Like for me, because I'm like, all right, the rest of the world's out there. I'm in my little spreadsheet with my math. And if I need any information, I'll just ask Google and then go right back to my spreadsheet. I'm nice and safe, So I guess there's something to that. Yeah, in terms of, I think everybody, obviously everybody's different. So what it is that helps you recharge or recover is going to be different for each person.
Well, I guess
some people, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, was just even to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, just even to think like what you just said, like, hey, jumping into this world and calculating some things in a spreadsheet, that's my thing. Like that is helpful. And so
first off, it's a thing that brings me happiness just in its own right. And second off, it is a refuge. It's an escape, It's like, okay, the rest of the world, I don't need to interact with anybody. I'm not doing anything. It's just me and data, And so, yeah, that for me is both enjoyable and an escape. A lot of people, despite the fact that I am a level 5 nerd, I've never been that into video games. But for a lot of people, I think they find a lot of comfort in, video games.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a leisure time activity, I guess. Make yourself unwind.
Yeah.
But for me, really, my depression and anxiety wasn't circumstantial. It was like chemical, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so, well, I didn't have an awesome childhood, so that kind of made things worse. But, yeah, that is kind of work, So like taking care of my mental health is time and effort and work, and it's not like fun.
Right.
Right. So I do therapy every week. I take pills, and yeah. So
yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying to think of a better answer to your question.
Well,
but
no,
I don't really have one.
I think that's too, is just, recognizing that, I mean, even you're saying like, going for walks and going into this world, and like, that's not enough,
No, yeah.
To do the work beyond that.
Well, yeah, I often tell people having like anxiety or depression is like having a broken leg. You wouldn't expect to be able to just take care of a broken leg on your own, right? You wouldn't expect to be like, I've got a broken leg, but I'll just limp for a bit. It'll be fine. No, you go get help from professionals, right?
Yeah.
And, okay, so you go get help, and I equate that to like, talking to, psychiatrists, psychologists, get therapists, and also getting the pills you need if that's the problem. If you're having a chemical imbalance situation, get the pills you need. But then that's the equivalent of getting a cast. You still need to do the therapy. In the case of the leg, it's physical therapy. In the case of your brain, it's therapy, but you still need to do that. You can't just, you need to talk it through, because I think that there are some people who, were it not for the bad chemicals in their brain, would be perfectly happy people. But I think most people who suffer from anxiety and depression, it's a combination. You've got some genuine psychological problems, not like crazy, but just you're sad, or you have had unresolved issues in your life, or I mean, we all do, but maybe if you have that plus the imbalances in your brain, then that leads to you being in a really bad place. And you got to talk about the bad stuff with your therapist and let the pills deal with the chemicals, and you got to do both.
Yeah. I love that metaphor about the leg. It really makes that come to life. And I want to honor your time, but sure. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about generative AI and Chat GPT. It seems to sit at the. I was composing a question. I, for one,
welcome our robot overlords, and we'll report any disloyal people.
That's right. But like the Venn diagram of who you are, like a computer programmer, you novelist, a science enthusiast or science nerd, as you're saying, to level 5. Like, so what do you? How do you? I
gotta fall back to my default position that humanity is good. We're not giving these chatbots the nuclear launch codes, right?
Yeah.
It's like, again, all that they're a tool, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're a tool. And so but they're a powerful tool. And I think the rate at which we're seeing them advance is maybe a little scary, but also not that scary, because what happened was a bunch of companies were working on these things at the same time, and they were all making advances. Then one of them, I don't remember which one first, made it public, and then the other companies are like, "Oh, we got to show off ours then." What appeared to us to be like 1 week during which chat AIs like went from like 0 to 1,000, just in skill level, was actually years and years of research in the making. But that having been said, I also think, again, these AIs are a tool. So if you have an AI that can solve complicated problems for you, it's just a matter of what problems are you going to give it.
Right. Yeah.
So eventually, you're going to have the AI where you say like, hey, how do we cure all forms of cancer? And it's like, I'm going to work on that. Another one's going to be like, and somebody else is going to be like, how do I get rid of all the Jews? And so it's just, you got to You gotta. It's how you use the tool, not
right.
like yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's, just signed up for something to learn more about it. So again, to use it as a tool.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably
another analogy I like to do for AIs is an AI is like a hammer. I can use a hammer to build a house, or I can use a hammer to murder someone. But it's the hammer isn't the problem here.
Right.
The existence of hammer technology is not what is not what defines whether or not houses get built or people get murdered. It's just what humans do with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Since you became a parent, have you experienced any changes to this perspective on the work you do?
Of course. It changes everything. You being absolutely. A father of 3, know exactly. Yeah. I mean, every single aspect of how I look at everything is now just completely different. It's funny. It's amazing. It's like I've wanted to be a dad my whole life, right? Nice. It just took me a long time to find a woman who will put up with my crap. And you need a woman to make a baby. I looked it up. See, like I told you, I'm good with Google.
A lot of research. Yeah.
A lot of research. Yeah. And so I'm 50 years old with a almost 2-year-old son. And so I'm going to be one of those old dads, but I've wanted to be a dad since I was in my 20s. But it's amazing. So the reason I'm telling you that is to say, like, this is something I've always wanted, right? And I've always been ready for, like, the life changes. So I've embraced all of these with a very positive attitude because I knew they were coming. But once you actually experience them and feel them, it's like, wow, this is neat. Yeah. This is the first time that I have unambiguously been willing to die for another person. Like without a second thought, I would die if I had to pick between me and him. Yeah. And it's like, you like to think that you'd be that way about your wife or something like that. But, if it's like somebody says, like, either you or your wife have to die, I'd be like, let me just give me a minute, But for the baby, it wouldn't even be a thought. And it's amazing how it changes your whole perspective on everything. Like, I know you want to know how it changes my views of science and the world and stuff like that, but it's my personal life that's like, for instance, when it comes to politics and stuff like that, up until now, I have never really cared about how the world is going to be like in another 50 years because I plan to be dead. Right. Yeah. So I've been like, climate change. Yeah, it is real. It's a real problem. Not really my problem, though, because I'm going to be dead. Yeah. But now I have a baby and he's going to have to go on and live in that world. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I guess I can.
Right.
Stuff like that. And it's really weird. And also my own life. I've had this kind of, this like, when I go, I go. I hope it doesn't hurt. That's it. But now I'm like, no, I have to be alive until my baby is an adult. Like Like
like I want to be able to get on the floor and run around with my grandkid. That's my, like, I want to. So I'm
Well, I'm just saying, like, in terms of sheer, like, I need numbers. To be alive until he's raised.
Yeah. Right.
And then in terms of like fiction and stuff like that, well, yeah, I mean, I'm working on a story, my next book. I don't know if I never really know if what I'm working on is actually going to go all the way through. It's early days yet, but my current book has a sort of a father-daughter relationship in it.
Oh, awesome.
I have a son, not a daughter, but still.
Yeah. So do you have some of those false starts for you? Like,
all the time. Oh, yeah. Oftentimes I'll have multiple ideas for what I want to do for my next story. And the only way to really find out is to just start writing all of them. So I've written a lot of chapter 1s just to see how a story feels.
Nice.
And if it feels good, then I start thinking about, okay, what's this total plot arc on this? What's the beginning? What's the middle? What's the end? And do I like this? Do I like that? And I just kind of work on the one that feels best. Right now I've zeroed in on one, but I have also in the past gotten way into a book and gone like, nope, this sucks. So I was writing after The Martian and before Artemis. Artemis is a book between The Martian and Project Hail Mary that no one ever remembers. But I was working on a book called Zhek, Zhek, and that was a soft sci-fi novel with aliens and telepathy and faster than light travel and all this fun stuff. And I was like, I honestly thought, I'm like, this is going to be my magnum opus. The Martian is going to be seen as like, oh, that's that other book that Andy wrote. This is the thing that people will be cosplaying at conventions, and this is going to be the one. And like, I got 70,000 words into that book, which was planning on being book one of a series. 70,000 words into it, and I was just like, this sucks. This is not good. It's boring. The characters aren't interesting. The story is plodding along at a snail's pace. I have way too many subplots. None of them are pretty good. None of them are good enough to be a primary plot. What was I thinking? It's basically like, I don't know. I just, you know what it was, is I tried to be a pantser. I tried to make stuff up as I go along.
Yeah.
And I've always been a plotter. I've always been like, okay, I know how the story's going to begin, the middle, the end. I know how that's going to go. I'm not just going to do it. Who's really good at that is George R.R. Martin. He considers writing to be like a garden. Let's just see what grows.
Yeah.
And I tried to do it that way, and I just ended up with a very weedy garden, I guess. So I'm not a pantser.
It's like the constraint, like the constraints of thinking about, because you have very little hand waving in your books, where it's like, this is, there's the science and everything. Do you think that there's creativity in having those constraints, and maybe?
Well, for sure. But also I had spent a long time coming up with how my particular faster than light travel works, and how, and just all the details of it. And I mean, I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, thank you for your time. I got two quick ones for you. So I think you're a teacher. When you're writing your book, you're teaching us something. We're able to think a little bit about science, about math, about hope. Even there's things you're doing so. What's the best thing you've learned to help you in your teaching?
Well, in as much as I don't really consider myself a teacher. That's a whole skill set that I don't have. But in as much as I have to tell the reader information, right? I need the reader to understand information. So I do need to teach them at least the basics of what's going on.
Yeah. And
sometimes that information is really dry, right? And I don't want my story to read like a Wikipedia article. No offense to Wikipedia, but that's purely informational, and a story is supposed to be fictional and fun. And so the one trick I found is humor. Just humor is, a reader will forgive anything if you're making them laugh. And so they will read and keep reading and stuff like that. So that's why I have my snarky narrators, right? Like Mark Watney, if Mark Watney explains to you exactly how a hydrazine reduction reaction goes, there's going to be like 15 profanities and 5 meme-related jokes in there, right? As long as I can keep the audience laughing, they can be learning by mistake. As far as I can tell, a lot of teaching is being sneaky and making the students learn when they're not looking. Yeah. I remember it wasn't until I was done with high school that I was like, sneaky ass teachers. When the biology teacher will be like, okay, you can bring in a 3x5 card of notes. You can write on one side of a 3x5 card, and that's it. But by rationing the information that you get, I mean, this is second nature to you, but it took me a long time to realize, by rationing the information you're allowed to put on the 3x5 card, it makes you stop and think about each bit of the information and then transcribe the information. And then by then you've learned it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so sneaky.
Yeah.
So sneaky.
Yeah. I had complex
algebra. I remember being in class, and I'm like, I got my 3x5 card ready for the test, and I never had to look at it.
Right.
Because I remembered the stuff.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Sneaky ass teachers.
Yeah, I had a professor. I was really nervous. It's the most advanced math class I've ever taken. And he said, if you know the definitions, you're going to get a C. And I'm like, well, I'll just memorize the definitions. And I did that. And the same thing is I had all these definitions memorized. I'm like, oh, well, now I know the answer because I actually know what the heck I can read this question. Yeah, exactly. So the final question is really just for you. Anything to promote? Anything you got out there? I would highly recommend the Randomize.
Okay, thanks.
From the Forward collection.
The Forward collection. All of the Forward collection stories are good. Thank you. I'm glad you like the Randomize. That's just a short story. Yeah, my latest book is still just Project Hail Mary. So I actually finished Project Hail Mary before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, it was very difficult for me to write. I think a lot of writers ran into that, which is surprising because it seems like the perfect situation to write. But I didn't really get much done. And then my wife and I had a baby. So I'm only just now getting back into the swing of things.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing your time. I appreciate you being willing to tolerate my persistent emails, but then also I also appreciate your work and just
thanks.
The things that you share, the metaphors that you have, even you talk about the leg metaphor with thinking about mental health and just again, like you're even though willing to walk with me a little bit on thinking about some of the teachers and how they stood out to you and what have they invested in you in your life. And I think we're all teachers. And as a parent too, I think I see myself as a teacher in that role as well.
Sure,
you're thinking about how you're influencing what environments are you creating to be sneaky, that sneaky ass teacher but oh, wow, you want to eat broccoli. That's great. They're little trees. Yeah. That's right. Exactly. So again, Andy, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking time on Amidon Planet.
Thanks for having me. And again, sorry I was late.
No problem. All right. Well, there's my conversation with Andy Weir. And I had another quote I wanted to share. This one is actually from the movie, not the book, from The Martian. And the last line is this, and I'll get into why it's important in a second. So the last line was, you just begin. You do the math, you solve one problem, and you solve the next one and the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And that kind of gets at why I wanted to have him on the podcast, this whole idea about problem solving. And, thinking about the standard for mathematical practice, number one is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. What parent doesn't want that for their child? What teacher doesn't want that for their student? And not necessarily even from a mathematical standpoint, but just in general, like having a problem and being able to think, all right, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to shut down. How do I go about solving this problem? And like you said, you just begin, right? You do the math, you solve one problem. And so thinking about the problems that are in front of us and how do we go about it? How do we build in the sort of disposition to problem solve? And that's why talking about this idea about messy tasks or juicy tasks. If you've been listening to the podcast, I think we did some no guilt book clubs, and one of the culminating episodes released a couple summers ago was on reimagining the math classroom. It had Catherine Ye, Mark Ellison, Carolee Kane Hurtado to come in and talk about their book. And within that book is the discussion of juicy tasks, and I call them messy tasks. And these are the types of tasks that I want my students in my class here at the University of Mississippi to think about incorporating within their teaching, especially within the math classroom. And so thinking about what is it to make a juicy task or a messy task? What is the kind of things we want our students doing within the classroom? And so thinking about an actual problem, which is a difficult task with an unknown solution path. And you think about all the things that are in the way. If you've seen The Martian or you've read Project Hail Mary, you've read any of Andy's books, there are these things that are in the way and you don't know how you're going to solve them, but you just start going, right? You just begin. You do the math, right? And you start putting out possibilities and engaging in problem solving. And so what kind of problems are we talking about? So again, some that have cognitive demand, that are achieving some sort of learning goal, right? That's called profundity. I'm not very good about pronouncing that one. Basically, it means it's connected to standards and it has some sort of cognitive demand, right? It's a difficult task with an unknown solution path, but it's connected to some sort of learning goal. Okay, that's one. Second thing is having elasticity. So this is the second kind of characteristic of a juicy task or messy task, whatever you want to call it. Elasticity means having flexible or entry points or exit points, and that this means a different sorts of representation. So you're thinking about, well, what represents attempting to solve a problem and what represents a solution. And so a lot of times when we think about it from like just the math perspective, it was a lot of symbols, right? So expand, FOIL, like really those are just procedures. Those aren't really problems. But thinking about how do we represent a solution, a lot of times it's more written but why couldn't it be spoken? Or even thinking about how do you attack a problem? And we sometimes talk about concrete, representational, and abstract. So concrete, can you like act out a problem, right? Act it out. Like if talking about combining I've got so many stickers, you got so many stickers. How many stickers do we have together? Like use stickers, right? That would be concrete. Or use physical counters, right? So you can actually model that problem. Or else draw it out, representational, draw it out, use drawings. That would be another way. Or abstract is just using symbols, numbers, right? And numbers are made up. They're made up. We're saying that these squiggles mean something, means they represent a certain quantity. So that's why they're abstract. Numbers are abstract. And so do we have ways that we can represent attacking a problem, either concrete, representational, and abstract, or even represent a solution that's concrete, representational, and abstract? And think about Mark Watney's, just talking about the Martian, his solutions were, hey, did it work, right? Did this thing work? That represents a solution. Or if it didn't work, all right, that means that's not a good solution, right? And so there's flexible ways to represent like how to do the work, but then how to represent the work, but then how to show what you did, right? So elasticity is one. And then finally is relevance, right? Is the problem relevant? And so even too, to say like, one of the examples in the book is talking about, or one of the stories in the book, one of the problems in the book is about whether or not Mark has enough calories to maintain his body until a return trip. And you're basically walking through, like, does he have enough calories? And it's basically an algebraic word problem, right? It's an algebraic word problem. And you're walking through that and why is it relevant? Like, it's not relevant to me that he has enough potato, but actually it is, because Andy has written a story in the fact that like I'm leaning in. I'm like, what, does he have enough calories? Oh my gosh. Or how does he create the communication system? And that's where the drama gets in. You relate to a character. And so, some of that could be, when you're thinking about putting problems into your classroom, like relevant could be, hey, I'm teaching you about your community. You might not know this about your community, but we're looking out into our community and you're seeing some things that you might not have known existed, right? So that might be a window onto a community. Or it could be a situation you're very familiar with, right? It could be dealing with, your favorite basketball team. It could be dealing with your one of your favorite hobbies, or just something you're just interested in intrinsically. And so that has some sort of relevance. So we talk profundity, elasticity, and relevancy. And that's what makes a messy task. And I think these sorts of things are what we see within the work of Andy Weir, and then getting kids to engage with these sorts of tasks. And then thinking about, again, I've used these examples before, like the lower level information that you need to know in order to attack these higher level problems, and not just doing lower level stuff for lower level stuff. And then what I mean by that is a trivia question. Like, what's the formula for circumference? I can say what that is, 2r pi, but not just that, but can you actually then take that information and use it for something? Does it mean something? Like, for example, Mark Watney had to use that to calculate the circumference of the circle that he created for his communication system. Right? He had to know how to create a circle. He had to think about a radius, and he marched it out. And all that sort of lower level information in order to solve a higher level problem. And that's what we're looking at with regards to messy tasks. So I also appreciate Andy being willing to walk with me with regards to thinking about being a teacher. I want to say he is a teacher. Obviously, he thought about that with regards to being a parent, but also as an author. And thinking about he is teaching us stuff. Like, people know more things about space, about living in space, and also just thinking about some of the even like calorie intake and how to sustain yourself, or just the potential for human capabilities. Like, he's scienced this up so much that you've learned a lot of things. And again, because of the stories, because of the way we want to engage with the characters, we are learning things. And if we're learning things, if he's creating a relationship with content, I call that teaching, right? He's facilitated a way for us to gain to have this relationship with content. Just like kind of made the connection with Rob Harvilla. He thinks he's just hosting a podcast that's talking about 90s songs, but he's being a teacher. He's teaching us about the 90s. Andy Weir's teaching us about science. If you read the book, the short story Randomized, you're going to learn about quantum computing. Didn't know anything about it before. Now I do, and I know it because of this story, right? And so, thinking about that, thinking about these compelling stories, but then also just thinking about some of the stories he shared about his teachers and like how they engaged him in learning, whether it was through just showing that they cared, but then also too the power of moments, like what I think it was Mr. Nicola did in history class, like to try to engage, like modeling Ellis Island. That was 35 years ago, and he still remembers it. He still remembers details about it, right? And the lessons learned from that. And so there's some power there. And so hey, we wanted to have Andy Weir on to talk to him in order to figure out how to learn how to teach better. And I think we learned some lessons. And I love getting these other perspectives of people that don't necessarily identify as a teacher. But again, I'm going to argue that Andy Weir is definitely a teacher. And so I want to thanks again for having him on. I keep saying it, but I so appreciate his time. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Amidon Planet podcast. Show notes for this episode can be found at amidonplanet.com/episode 90. One thing that we're going to make sure to post is there's some other podcast episodes that I thought were interesting that offered some different angles about Andy Weir if you're interested about him. But definitely his TED Talk where he talks about publishing his book. We want to put that out there. We'll put the links to all his books in there as well. So those show notes will have definitely a number of links that you want to see. He also has got a great website as well. He was a computer programmer, folks. He's got good stuff. If you're looking at ways to support the podcast, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion. Maybe you have an author you think, hey, it'd be interested to interview this person and think about what they have to say about teaching. Love to, or even a different angle on some of these alternative sort of people to talk about learning to teach better. I love it. That's kind of the reason why I started this podcast in the first place. So if you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can send it to joel@amidonplanet.com. Love to get those in the mailbag. You can also, if you want to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, and review, and share this episode. Hey, maybe you know of an Andy Weir fan and you want to share this with them. They learned a little bit of something about Andy. You go ahead and do that, please. When you do that, that lets other people find this content, and they might find it useful as well. So as always, you can follow at Amidon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amidon Planet Facebook page. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amidon Planet download, which contains teaching resources and updates from Amidon Planet. Included on that latest update, we will have links to the new Amidon Planet swag, if you're interested in that. I think it actually goes along really well with Andy Weir's sort of message when he talks about hope. I was mentioning it too, I got some more Be the Good swag, and I like it because, one, it's believing that there's good in the world, all right? And I think that's a message I think Andy Weir would get behind. But then also be the good. So how do you personally be the good? And that could be engaging in exactly the kind of stuff that Andy Weir, engaging in his passion of, getting in those spreadsheets, math, doing some science and math within those spreadsheets, and then coming up with a compelling story in which to share that was good for me. He was being the good, and that was good for me. And then now I get to share that with others. And so, hey, how do we figure out how to be the good? So if you like that message, that it's wanted on a coffee cup or a t-shirt or sweatshirt that'll be on, you can either go to the footer on AmidonPlanet.com, or you can subscribe to the Amidon Planet download. There'll be links in there as well. Finally, check out. You can also check out the Amidon Planet store, Amidon Planet bookshop. Links are in the footer of the webpage of AmidonPlanet.com. Anything you do there will support the production costs of the podcast. All right, that's it. Hey, thank you for spending time on Amidon Planet. Thanks to Andy Weir for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. Finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.